Hi everyone, how's it going? It's James here and welcome to another video. Right, God knows where the idea for this came from. I'm going to do a video trying to remember all the albums that I had on cassette back in the day. I mean, the main category is albums which I bought on commercial cassette. In other words, I didn't buy a CD, I didn't buy a record, I bought the tape. There's one or two that I think belong to other people, but they were so much a part of my life, I'm going to treat them as if they were mine. I got my first tape player in, I think it was 1981. I'll try and flash up a picture of something which at least half resembles what I had. And I'd been listening to records since I was 3 years old, so I was kind of about 11 when I finally got into cassettes, and I didn't immediately get into listening to music on cassette. I used to make my own blank tapes. What I used to do was I used to read books into this tape recorder and then listen back to the tapes. And it took a little while before I got my first cassette. And I'm fairly certain, as in my first cassette of music, I'm fairly certain that it was Back in Black by AC/DC. I didn't buy it. A friend of mine, I still can't quite remember how it came about, but he gave it to me. I know it seems rather unlikely, but I've just got this distinct memory of my friend Christian. Basically, he wanted to get me into AC/DC. He had Back in Black on cassette, and my memory tells me that he just gave it to me. I know it sounds unlikely. I'm wondering maybe if there was a swap involved. You know, maybe I swapped it for a knife or something. I don't know. I used to collect knives. But I've got a memory of being on the wall at the front of my parents' house on a summer's day, listening to AC/DC on this cassette. My parents bought me it was a Walkman. It wasn't a Sony Walkman. Maybe it was a Sony Walkman. It was a Walkman. It was a red Walkman, and I remember having that and listening to it on headphones. But also I did have a cassette. It was a cheesy cassette. It was like a kind of pop rock version of Mozart's 40th Symphony. And I remember I used to have to listen to it in my bedroom really quietly, or I used to have headphones on with the Walkman, because my dad was really into classical music, and he wouldn't have approved of me listening to this it was like a kind of cheesy synth organ, wah-wah guitar version of Mozart's 40th Symphony. So I kept that one to myself. But Back in Black, I've got a memory of hearing that on headphones, and like I said, my friend gave me his copy. I really don't know why. But I think the first album that I actually owned on cassette that was definitely mine, bought for me as a gift by my parents, was Tug of War, and I got to know that album on cassette, and I've still got really strong memories of hearing it for the first time on headphones and just being totally transported. It was just such an amazing experience. I always loved the sound of cassettes, but for some reason it never really developed for me as a proper way of listening to music. I mean, you'll see today I don't have that many albums to show you, so for some reason, I think it was because I've been really into records, from the word dot, and I was never very impressed with the way that cassettes, obviously they were kind of small scale, so you didn't really get the artwork. So, I mean, I loved my cassette of Tug of War, but I do seem to remember being rather frustrated that I couldn't enjoy the artwork properly. And but the sound of it absolutely blew me away, and I just used to live inside this album. I must have listened to it 1,000 times, Not sure if that was because it was on cassette, or I think it probably was, because that was the big liberation for Sony Walkmans, is that you were able to listen to music on the go. It's difficult to imagine now a time when, when it was records or cartridges or whatever, you were confined to your room, really. You couldn't really listen to music outside the room, and that was the great liberation of these mobile cassette players. Okay, now this is Wings Wildlife, and I bought this from a little shop in Cornwall, in Bude, when I was on holiday, and I'm estimating 1983, the year after Tug of War, and I was about 12 years old, on holiday with my parents, and they've given me a bit of spending money, and they'd sent me up the road to the shop, and I went into a bookshop, and it must have sold cassettes. I saw that record, I knew nothing about it. I was a big Paul McCartney fan already, but I didn't know this record, and obviously there's no band name on the record, and on cassette it was really hard to see. I thought, hang on a minute, that looks like Paul McCartney and Wings on there, and I remember squinting at it and going, yeah, it is. So I bought it without knowing anything about it, and that was a big album for me. Just in that 2 week summer holiday in Cornwall, I remember walking to the beach every day. We were staying in this block of flats, and I would go early in the morning. I would walk down to the beach. We had this beach hut, and I would go down, unlock the beach hut, and I would have already been up and about, you know, long before my parents. And I used to listen to that record on headphones every morning as I went back into, you know, to open the beach hut. So it's just indelibly stamped in my memory as the record that I enjoyed on that holiday. And it's a very summery album. It's just, you know, lovely music. And I bought the record, this one, shortly after coming back from that holiday because I'd enjoyed it so much on cassette. Now another album I had on cassette very early on was Flash Gordon by Queen. Got no memory of buying it or if it was bought for me. It was the only Queen album to date that I hadn't owned on record, and I had it on this cassette, and I don't have that many memories of it other than how I came to not have it anymore, which is a very strange story. My dad worked in a local FE college, and they were having some kind of jumble sale or charity thing, and he came into my room one day and he said, "Do you have any records or tapes that you don't want for this charity thing?" And I kind of looked and I was like, no, not really, because I had hardly any cassettes and I had a very small number of records. And he seemed a bit put out, and he kind of said, "Well, you know, I think it's, you know, it would be a good thing if you were to find something." And it's not the kind of thing he would normally have done. And he went out of the room, and I just scratched my head a little bit and thought, oh, right, okay, well, if I've got to give something away, I suppose it might as well be Flash Gordon. So I ended up giving away my tape of Flash Gordon. And I still don't quite understand that. I still don't really, because chances are it was my dad who bought it for me in the first place. I'm not quite sure why it was so important to him that I gave it away, but hey ho, it happens. I had Night at the Opera on cassette. I think I bought it from Cobb Records in Wales when I was on holiday with my folks. And I already knew this album. I had it on vinyl already. I probably got the cassette, I don't know, probably in the mid-1980s. I'd buy cassettes if I was away on holiday somewhere and I was desperate to hear an album. I'd just get it into my head, you know, because I'd have my Walkman with me and I'd want to hear, you know, a particular album. So I'd have to go and just, you know, buy the tape. I didn't have for many years a tape deck that could actually record records. The first time I had that was the Christmas of 1991 was the first time I had that. So what I used to do before I had a tape deck, I did used to make tapes of my records, but I used to get my tape recorder and I used to put it on a chair in front of the speakers, put the record on, turn the music up as loud as I possibly could, and just basically just record the sound of the room, of the music coming out of the speakers. And obviously, you know, it made for some truly appalling cassettes, but that's what I had to do. So I wasn't able to take music away with me really, so I would just buy things on cassette as and when I saw them, if I fancied listening to them. Now what was strange about this, I'm not quite sure why this happened. It's going to happen again in a record that I'm going to show you in a minute. But on the cassette version of Night at the Opera, there were two songs that were swapped round. So the vinyl version, side one ends with the song Seaside Rendezvous, and then on side two, the third track is Good Company. Now the cassette version that I bought swapped those two songs around. And now I'm thinking of it, I think maybe I had the tape first, because I was surprised when I came to own the record that those two songs were not the same way around as the tape. Now I don't know why they would have done that. Maybe it's something to do with the length of tape on one side and the other, and they could fit Good Company onto the end of side one better than they could on side two, but that doesn't really make sense to me. Answers on a postcard if you know the answer to that. Why would a cassette version of an album change the track listing? And I do have another example of that coming up in a minute, which is even stranger. Okay, next one. The Final Cut by Pink Floyd. I bought this from an outdoor market stand, and it was imbued in Cornwall. It was on the last day of a holiday. Might have been the holiday when I had the wildlife cassette, I can't remember. But there was always this big outdoor market just on the seafront, and it was the last day of this incredible 2-week holiday. And I remember I was kind of mooching around in that slightly forlorn mood that you often find yourself in at the end of a really marvellous childhood holiday. I was feeling a bit melancholy, I think it might have been raining slightly, even though we'd had this great kind of, you know, glorious week of sunshine. And I found a market trader selling cassettes, and he had the final cut by Pink Floyd. I'd lost touch with Pink Floyd. I'd got the Wall album back in 1980, but this was 1983 by now. I didn't even know that Pink Floyd was still around. But so I got the final cut on that holiday. I bought it on the last day of the holiday, took it home and listened to it at home for the first time. So I think that was the only Pink Floyd record I ever owned on tape. Next one. Okay, so this is the other example of the strange track swap thing. This is El Dorado by the Electric Light Orchestra, which I bought from on cassette. I bought from Cobb Records in Wales. I bought most of my ELO albums from Cobb Records when I was about 14 or 15. I used to pick them up as and when I saw them. El Dorado was the last one and I couldn't find it. And in the end I ended up buying a cassette of it because I wanted to hear it. So I bought the cassette. I bought this vinyl version a few years later, I can't remember. And this again, what this had, it wasn't a swap track thing, but at the end of side one, the song Poor Boy the Greenwood fades out on the cassette, and you turn the cassette over and then it faded back in, so that one song was split across the two sides. So again, maybe it's something to do with the way that the tape, the length of the tape from side one to side two, I don't know, it seems very strange to me. But yeah, that was an album I listened to for the first time on cassette, and it was on holiday in Wales. So we're getting on now to me being probably about, well, 17 or 18, getting ready to go to university or starting to think about it, and I'm fairly certain, let's do this one first actually. When I was 16 I got into heavy metal. Now I don't know why I owned Savage Amusement by the Scorpions on cassette, because I owned this record pretty much from when it first came out. I think what happened is I bought the record and then we were probably going on holiday and I wanted to listen to the album and I wanted a decent copy of it, so I suspect I bought a cassette copy of it as well to have on the holiday. But I know it was a proper version because I can remember the artwork on the cassette, so I definitely had this on tape at the same time as having the record, and I listened to it. We were on holiday in a caravan in the same place that Cobb Records is, and it was when I was getting really into heavy metal. I remember just loving this album. For some reason I just got into the Scorpions. They were a band that I just gravitated towards, God knows why. When I was a kind of 16-year-old Welsh music fan, and I just honed in on this kind of classic German metal band who'd been around since, for donkey's years. Savage Amusement had come out in 1988, so that was the year before I went to university, so I got it on cassette and I got it on record. The cassette is long gone. I should say now I don't own any of these cassettes anymore. I got rid of them all back in the day. I don't know where they've gone. I used to have cassettes rolling around in the car all the time, and I loved the sound of tapes, but I never fell in love with them as a delivery method for listening to music. I was never attached to them, in the same way that I was attached to records and CDs. Okay, this is Energy Orchard. They were a Celtic rock band from Belfast. This was shortly before I went to university. I was watching the TV one night and it was some kind of magazine programme of some sort, and it was about, I think it was about Irish rock groups, Irish music, and I heard the song Sailor Town by Energy Orchard, and I just absolutely loved it. But I don't remember, I have no memory at all of why I bought the album on cassette rather than on record. Maybe, I suspect sometimes it might have been as simple as just going into a record shop, looking for the record, not being able to find it, and then realising that I could buy the cassette. It might just have been as, something as straightforward as that. But I bought it on tape, and this is one of the albums that I had in my car when I first learned to drive. I drove a white and green Citroen 2CV, and I remember this is one of the tapes that was constantly rolling around on the floor in the car, and it's a really good album. It's kind of melodic, heart-string tugging, quite Celtic sounding rock music. Brian from Shamrockin Records likes this record. I've heard him talking about it. Check it out if you've not heard it. It's a good album. I went to university in 1989, and at the end of my first week there, Squeeze came to play in the Great Hall, and this was a mind-blowing moment for me because Squeeze had been my favourite band ever since I was about 7 years old. I was now 19, I was at university, and I discovered the week before I was due to go to university that the band that were going to play at the end of my Freshers Week was Squeeze. It was just absolutely incredible. It was when Jules Holland was back in the band again, so it was quite amazing. It was a fantastic gig. It was really, really great show. I bought the album on this is Frank. I bought the album on vinyl just before I went to uni. I probably acquired it in, I'd say probably about maybe late August going into September, and then I was off to uni in the October. And when I went to university, I had no record player. I didn't take a record player with me. All I had was a cassette player and a Sonny Discman at that point. And I remember the morning after the Squeeze gig, my friend John was off into town because we lived in halls on this campus. And he was off into town, and he said to me, "Hey, do you want me to buy you something from town? You know, do you need anything from town?" And I think he meant, you know, do you want a loaf of bread? Do you want a bottle of Coke or something? And I said, "Yeah, can you go into HMV and get us the albums Frank by Squeeze?" And I gave him a £10 note, and he was kind of like, "Okay." And off he toddled, and he came back, and you know, he had it. And I think after that gig, I just wanted to hear the music again. And I still associate this album with that first year at university. I've got very clear and strong memories, you know, the various tracks on this album just take me straight back to those days. Now this next one, I'm fairly certain I didn't own this. This was my friend Phil who had it on cassette. We formed a band together in my third year at university. I knew this album already. I had it on vinyl from when I was about 16, but Phil had it on a bought cassette, and I remember driving around in my 2CV. It was a great album for rolling down the roof of the car, because I had a Citroen 2CV, you know, which had a retractable roof, and we used to just drive around town just blasting the songs on this record, you know, Knuckle Bones, Just Like Paradise. It was just a perfect album for being, you know, 19, 20 years of age, the sun's shining, you're in your white and green Citroen 2CV Dolly, and you're blasting Diamond Dave. Great memories, and that album's always been very close to my heart for that reason. This one I've got slightly more ambivalent memories of. This is Thin Lizzy and Jailbreak. I think this is one I probably bought on cassette because I couldn't find the record. So I bought it, but I do seem to remember that I went through a bit of a bad time at university. You know, a bit of a romantic catastrophe happened between me and somebody else, and I was in a bit of a bad way. And I do remember driving around listening to this record and kind of wallowing in it a little bit. There's a wonderful song called Fight or Fall, which is very melancholy, and I used to kind of wallow in self-pity and drive around listening to my cassette of Jailbreak. I'm sure the rockier songs on it helped to cheer me up. But yeah, that was one that I've got. In fact, I've got quite strong memories also listening to that on my Walkman on various holidays. Okay, this is a record that I acquired. This is Pills, Thrills and Bellyaches by Happy Mondays. I was in a show, I was in a play of some kind when I was at university, and it was in the theatre, and they were using this as the soundtrack to the show, and the cassette was kicking around the lighting box, you know, where the chap sits who does the lights for the show. Weeks after the show had finished, this cassette was still just lying around. It was out of its case. It was clearly, it had been left, abandoned. It was being, you know, it was a neglected musical item. So I just basically, eventually, I just acquired it, purloined it, and I took it home, and I had a terrible bedroom upstairs in this awful house above a shop when I was an undergraduate. It was like the house from The Young Ones, if you picture that, you know, just really grim, just really horrible place. And I was dying of heartbreak, and but this was an important record for me because it was the first time I started trying, or I found myself listening to contemporary pop music. You know, because when I went to university, I was very kind of set in my ways. You know, I liked, you know, there was Paul McCartney, and there was Queen, and there was Pink Floyd, and there was the Beatles, and there was, you know, but you know, most of my peers were into the music of the day, you know, the Stone Roses, the Happy Mondays, Manchester was happening, and I'd kind of held aloof from it all, really. And listening to this record on cassette, I think, was the first time I started to feel maybe I'm starting now to plug into something which is actually happening here and now. You know, I'm 20 years old, maybe it's time to start getting with it a little bit. And this record was massive in 1991. You know, the songs of this record, and just the Happy Mondays songs generally were really just in the air that we were all breathing. So it was quite good to have this record in my possession. There's two more to finish, one of which I don't have on record, and one of which I don't own on any format. but I remember buying Jordan the Comeback by Prefab Sprout on cassette from HMV or Virgin in Leeds in the early 90s. I got into Prefab Sprout the previous year. I bought a couple of their records on vinyl. Wanted this one. Again, I suspect it's one of those occasions when I wanted it on record, couldn't find it, so I bought the cassette. You know, cassettes were never my first choice, and you know, they were there for convenience more than anything else if I couldn't get them on any other format. And of course, this was the era when CDs were starting to come in anyway, and I've got a feeling that I picked that up on CD quite soon after having it on tape. So yeah, Prefab Sprout the Comeback, great album. And the final one I'll just mention, that I don't own anymore, but I had a cassette of the B.B. King album. I think it's called There Is Always One More Time. And there was a track on it called The Blues Comes Over Me. And I heard that on the Whispering Bob Harris show, which was a late night radio show which was on air in 92, 93. I don't think I'd heard of B.B. King at this point, but I just absolutely loved that song. And again, 99% certain I would have bought it from Virgin Records in Leeds because I couldn't get hold of the vinyl copy. So that kind of wraps it up, I think, anyway. I've been racking my brains, trying to think, trying to remember, you know, it's quite difficult. I have to kind of picture various album covers and try and ask myself, can I picture the cassette copy? You know, can I see the cassette in my mind's eye? That's how I've managed to establish whether I actually owned any of these or not. It was quite interesting. When I kind of first went away to uni, I realised what a big thing cassettes were for a lot of people. You know, I used to go into different houses and different, you know, rooms of various students, and most people seem to have like really big cassette collections, and I never did. It was just one of those things. So, I mean, you can kind of see there, get a bit of an impression quite how far I went down the cassette route. It wasn't very far at all. From 1991 onwards, I had a proper cassette deck, and from that moment on, I did then used to make compilation tapes, and I used to record albums. So I had a lot of albums after that, which were taped, you know, onto blank cassettes. But I don't want to start trying to list them because we'll be here all day. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was a bit of a ramble, but I just wanted to come and share those memories with you. So hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.